Good afternoon, everybody. It seems we are at the cusp of a good afternoon and good evening. Perfect break after tea time. We are here for the parallel session 1 on engendering social change, harmonizing social gains with profit making. A bit about the panel in just a moment. We will go over what the discussions are going to be like. Entrepreneurship is often linked to profit making. The challenge, however, for many social entrepreneurs is in balancing the business aspects of profit making while doing due justice to social change. The panel will look to explore aspects of building sustainable entrepreneurship, aligning business profitability with gender empowerment and agency development, and equitable social justice. We will begin by introducing our chair, Malika Sarabhai. Very, very happy to have you here, ma'am. Malika Sarabhai is a social activist and an Indian classical dancer. She's the director of Darpana Academy of Performing Arts. It is located in Ahmedabad, a center where arts is used as a language for behavior change. Among many of her feminist performances, her solo theatrical work, Sita's Daughters, has toured around the world and has performed over 500 times. We will keep the introductions short, although everybody comes with very heavy-duty work experience. Our first panelist here today is Akkai Padmashali. She will be the only person who's joining us in person. The others will be joining us via web. Akkai is a social activist and trustee director of Undede, a feminist convergence of children's rights, women's rights, and rights of sexual minorities. She was conferred with the Karnataka Rajyotsava Prashasti for her fearless activism for the rights of sexual minorities. Very happy to have you here, Akkai. We are joined online by Tiffany Brar. She's a community service worker. Can we have her up on the screen, if that's possible? I will proceed with the introductions. Tiffany is a community service worker and founder of Jyotirgamaya Foundation, a non-profit to reintegrate visually challenged persons and differently abled persons into mainstream society. She's a strong advocate for accessibility, rights of differently abled, and a strong supporter of gender equality. Happy to have you here, Tiffany, if you can hear us.
Yes, ma'am, I can hear you. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can. Thank you so much for being here. We will start the session soon.
Thank you.
Last but not the least,
Yes,
Puran Chandra Pandey joins us today, also via web. Puran is the member board of trustees at World Food Program Trust for India and the resident representative at Climate Scorecard in USA. He is widely quoted on issues related to sustainability, circular design, sustainable development, and environmental policies. Happy to have you here, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I will now hand over to our chair, Malika. Oh, she's joined. I'll just introduce her. Okay, I will introduce our fourth panelist, Ruchira Gupta, who will join us slightly later because there's a timings mismatch. Ruchira is the founder, president of Apne Aap Women Worldwide and International that organizes resistance efforts to end sex trafficking by preventing intergenerational prostitution. She's a social activist, feminist campaigner, and was a journalist with Telegraph in the past. Over to you. They do need mics.
Good afternoon. I always find that I'm stuck with sessions when everyone actually wants to snooze. So wake up, otherwise I'll get up and make you do some rigorous exercises before we get into entrepreneurship. You know, for some reason, the world seems to have been divided between people who want to make exploitative profits and people desperately trying to do some good for humanity. And we know that it doesn't have to be like that. It does not have to be a competition between rapacious profit makers and extremely fund-starved NGOs, and activists. More and more, I find, as I talk to younger people today, people coming out looking for their first jobs or second jobs, that the world is changing. When I was in the Indian Institute of Management 40 years ago, there were 2 out of 200, me and one other person, who opted out of being in the corporate world. Otherwise, the corporate world was where everybody was heading. But I find 40 years hence that people are beginning to ask questions of their corporations. What are your practices? What is your line that comes to you to make a final product? Who do you fund? What do you believe in? Who do you cohort with? And I think it is that window that we need to try and encourage and uphold. Because especially now, after these 9 months of COVID or 10 months of COVID, I hope some of us are beginning to realize that a lot of the things that were shoved down our throat as success, wearing branded clothes was very important, wearing in a fancy car was very important, and I hope that at least some of us have reassessed what is really important, what we can do without, what is really marketing ploys, what is manipulation of us by brand managers, and what really counts. I think most of us remember early days when the Italians were completely locked down, and when one of them went onto a balcony and started playing the saxophone, and from across the buildings, others joined, and there was this amazing medley of music that was then passed on from city to city and country to country. Even talking about it, my hair rises, because it was such a sharing of what is essentially life. It was a sharing from soul to soul, irrespective of who you were, where you were, what color you were, what bloody caste you were, what gender you were. It didn't matter. It was humanity trying to survive and understanding for the first time what pygmies we are when compared to nature. And I hope that we are at a time, and this conference has come at a time, when we are pressing our refurbish buttons, our refresh buttons, so that we can understand what really is important in society. There's an interesting study that was done a few years ago by the Harvard Medical School. They had 100 couples come together and put electrodes on their head to see what, when offered to them, would light up that part of the brain that releases the maximum oxytocin, which makes us feel great. And they were given questions like, if you got your favorite ice cream, or if you got a $100,000 raise, or if you could make love to your dream woman or dream man. And one of the questions was, if you could help somebody without any expectations. And unbeknown to the people themselves, the portions of the brain that lit up the most was for this last one. When we give out of the generosity of our heart without expecting anything, without even expecting that we will feel good about it, when we do it as our most basic instinct that we have lost. And I want to share this with you because I'm saying, if that is what makes us the happiest and healthiest, why are we chasing other dreams? And I think in this session, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to speak about why profit and doing good are not dichotomies and cannot be dichotomies. If we want to go towards a more humane world, we have to break this dichotomy. Because what is good for our banks has to be good for the earth and has to be good for every individual who is concerned, who is a consumer, who is a worker, who is a management person. It has to be a triple win. It cannot be otherwise. I'm going to go first to welcome Tiffany and Puran. I'm delighted to have you here. Tiffany, I'm going to come to you first and ask you to address this question. You have 20 minutes to speak, and after which we will go to the house and to some comments. Tiffany. Tiffany, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I can hear you.
Would you like to start?
So, ma'am, engendering social... Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes. Engendering social change. How do we engender social change? How do we harmonize it? How do we inculcate this in our day-to-day life with gender equality? The first and foremost thing is that when I grew up as a woman with a disability. Now, that itself was a taboo because women are considered to be worshipped in stories and abused in real life and oppressed the most since prehistoric times. It happens even in today's era. In fact, it happens on a day to day basis, be it the home, be it the classroom, be it the workplace. So, what about the plight of girls and women with disabilities? If I, from an educated family, from a good background, am saying this, what would happen to those rural women and girls who are oppressed and segregated? When I became blind, it was a setback for my parents. They wanted to actually do so many things, and I was a disappointment. But later on, when I started proving my worth, when I started going to school, when I started learning small, small things, I began to become the apple of their eye. But when I wanted to travel alone by bus, the first thing my father told me is that you can't because you're a girl. If you were a boy with a disability, it would have been okay, but you're a girl. Someone will kidnap you, someone will rape you, someone will close your mouth and strangle you and throw you into the lake. And I said, I don't care. If that is what has to happen, it will happen. And I, with my white cane, at the age of 19, I started working. My place of work was 15 kilometers from my place of residence as I worked with Braille Without Borders, Kandari International. I traveled by 2 buses and a long walk. I started to travel. People eve-teased me. It was very, very difficult. Although I was working in a place which advocates for social change, I was not able to make that social change among the people who I met on a daily basis. I could not change their attitudes. I tried with every pedestrian helping me to cross the road that I'm a girl, but I have a job and I earn and I'm not useless. They began cursing my parents. How will you do things? Why should this happen? They started cursing me. They started cursing my parents, even the bus conductors. But I decided that I'm going to still walk, I'm going to still travel, I'm going to still do things. I then started the mobile blind school where I traveled to the houses of blind girls and women in rural areas. Even men would try to reach out to them, counsel their parents. And then I started my organization in 2015, the Jyotirgamaya Foundation, which works to empower blind people. We now have many, many girls who have come out of their shackles, who walk alone on the streets with their white canes, who board buses, who buy things from the shops. Can you believe it? It's even difficult for a girl to go to a hotel and buy something. It is so difficult. People look down upon us because we are girls. But if a blind man goes to a hotel to buy something, he is welcomed and he is given the things he wants. But we are questioned. There is no blind girl here that I know in my area or maybe in Kerala who has the strength to go alone into a restaurant and eat food. These taboos have to change. We have to engender this in our social change, in our non-profit sectors, by more and more sensitization, more and more sensitization about gender, about sexuality, about reproductive health. We conduct workshops for girls and women with all disabilities about reproductive health with the necessary models of the necessary organs and assistive devices. We also conduct rights-based sessions about the acts, about the Convention of Rights of Women and Children, the CRC, the SEDA, and the UNCRP, the United Nations Convention for Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We conduct exclusive sessions for girls and women because they are not aware of their reproductive health. They are not aware of so many things. I even urge the government to put a kind of a wristwatch or a bangle on people's hands so that when we are in danger, we can just press a button on the bangle. But when we use apps, I recently heard that there was an app in Tamil Nadu where people can just log on the app and someone comes, a police people come from the control room. But do you think an attacker is going to wait for us to take out our phone? Do you think he will actually let us do so? No, he won't. So we have to find a kind of an assistive device where we can do this very, very discreetly. We also train our blind beneficiaries in self-defense activities. We teach them about all their rights. There are so many myths that women with disabilities are not allowed to have children, that they are not able to look after the children, that they are not able bodies, that they do not have any sexuality. But yes, they do. They can have children, they can raise children, they can look after children. There is a story called Somewhere a Mockingbird, where a blind lady is happy that her children are sighted because her family is happy her children are sighted. Of course, no mother wants their children to be blind if they are blind. But of course, this prejudice must be changed. This must be changed. The stereotypes must be changed. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany. I'm not going to comment in between. I will go to Puran. Can we hear your thoughts on the topic of today? Puran has an enviable CV. When Gauri just said a few words, but you can look him up and look him up in the book. All our speakers today have very enviable CVs.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for your very kind introduction, and I am truly privileged to be speaking to all the listeners and being able to interact with you, although virtually. I mean, I would have been very happy to have traveled because Kerala is one of my fond cities, but the fond state and several cities in Kerala are very dear to me because of several reasons. So having said it, I come straight to the theme of the day today. And I would like to start by putting a bit of focus on social change and why the social change is very important for each one of us, if not for everybody. Which means that whenever we live in a society because we are human beings and we are social animal, and therefore we are born in a family, we inherit a community, then we become the part of a larger ecosystem, and that ecosystem then begins to work out in a very peculiar way, which is nothing but very complex web of human interactions and relationships. So we grow in a home, but then we carry our lessons, we carry our virtues once we begin to move out of the home and begin to interact with our colleagues and friends and larger community outside. And therefore, two things become very important. One is that how do we really interact with each other, with one another? And how do we really build up our relationships, both with one another, each other, and with the society overall? And that is more human side of being a human. But then there is another side to it, and that side is that while we are mingling, meeting, interacting with each other, we also tend to transform social and cultural institutions around us. We are being saved on the one hand by these, but then at the same time, we also tend to save these cultural and social institutions. And therefore, there is a bit of web, and that web is, while these things happen, we also begin to see that over time, of course, it doesn't really happen overnight, but over time, we begin to shape and profoundly shape the society that we live in. So there is a fairly deeper web of human interface, human interaction and the way we hold our relationships with one another. But then that is not really limited to each one of us. It goes beyond and begins to, over time, influence and change society, because that change comes through transformation within social and cultural institutions. And we can relate this to every time that we would go back and try and see 20 years back, 10 years back, and even today. But then the issue is that why should we really care about it? I mean, what is so big? What's the deal? And the only thing which I could figure out, Madam Chair, was that when you read the whole history of social change, the one thing that stands out across communities, across societies, across nations, that it is a collective power of people, which is very, very important, and that determines the destiny for many of us that we live in a society and begin to change it in a way that we wish to change through our interactions and our human relationships. Having said it, there are three elements within our society, which is economic, which is very, very important, because we all need to have something to earn as we grow. We need to feed ourselves as we grow. And this sort of activity continues to go on. So therefore, economic activity within the realm of social prudence becomes very, very important. There is an environmental aspect which is very important, and you mentioned it, and you mentioned it so well. And we have had this corona for the last 9-10 months, and we have learned quite a bit. And we now believe that we have got to live in harmony with the nature, and we cannot really do anything whereby we end up destroying it, because consequences are going to be very severe if we were to really look back and continue to do what we did pre-COVID. We're not really going to survive. And then we have political element to it, which means that we have a sovereign government, and the government has to do several things. They have to take care of security, laws, and see to it that there is harmony within these three instruments, because these instruments are very important and we cannot really live without it. And while these things will continue to go on, I will really take only one example out of it, and that example would be of business. Because when we talk about well-being, we talk about harmony, we talk about growth, we talk about GDP, we talk about financial or monetary well-being, we have to really think about the money. And what can money do? Who are the people who can put private capital? Because governments around the world do not have money. And I'm not really naming any country, but around the world, there is no government or hardly any government which has enough money. So we have to really look around and figure out which are these people who have private capital and would like to deploy, not only to make money and profit and see to it that their shareholders are happy because they're putting the money in, but they also have got to see that while they put the money, they generate employment, and they also put money in the hands of the people so that they can go and spend that money on several aspects of their life, which is both socio-economic and otherwise. And therefore, the question which is now becoming more and more relevant is that can we really have a situation where 5% of those people who have enough money might end up controlling the lives of 95%, which is the rest of the population. Or the 5% people who have enough money have got to see to it that they do deal with that money in a way that making money is not bad. I mean, business means that, if you are into it, you have to maximize the shareholders' value by making money and money and more money. But then it cannot going on like this. And these people have got to figure out the wider expectations of the community and the people. And what are the kind of demands which are now being generated from within the society because of the collective power of the people. And these general expectations from the people in our society could be several, but I think one thing stands out, whereby everybody says that, look, you have got to spend your money in a way that you continue to do whatever you have been doing within the rules and regime of the rules, but you also have got to see to it that the people of the society, the community within which you operate or which you have been operating for a long, long time is not really going to be devoid of income, fairness, equity, inclusion, and rest of it. So there is a new social contract being conceived, both by the businesses on the one hand, because now they're being challenged. And they're being challenged by the people in the society for several reasons, but one of the reasons is that people are saying, you have also got to take care of the society or the community within which you have been operating. So therefore, my sense of the situation is that there is a fairly deeper mini revolution going on, whereby we are heading for a new social contract, not between community and the government, which is always there. The sovereign government has got to ensure that there is a social welfare contract within the people and the government. But now that contract is going to be expanded and expanded down to the private sector. And therefore, the private sector has got to now realize that days are going to be very different, and they will have to really consider doing things whereby society and community within which they operate also prosper, also has enough income, also can see more inclusion happening. There is equity in which the private sector or the business is spending the money. And therefore, there has to be a new social contract, and we seem to be heading towards it. And I think COVID-19 has been a boon in disguise. So that is one thing which I would like to say. Social contract is something which is no longer going to get confined to what really has happened traditionally between the governments and the people, but that social contract concept is going to be extended to what is really going to be happening as we go along between the community, the people within the community on the one hand, and the business and the private sector. Because I'm saying business because we also have business in the government sector. So I'm really going to call it as business. So business and people, which is the community, they will have a different kind of a social contract going forward. And I think that kind of a propulsion, if I could say, has already begun. And therefore, we need to be very conscious of it. Business has got to be very seized of this whole change. Because this change is going to accelerate, and it is not really going to stop, or is not really going to slow down at all as we move into post-COVID-19 period. So that would be a new normal. And your question is very valid, that can there be really any contradiction between businesses making profit and also saying to it that they also serve the community and the society which they are supposed to. And therefore, I'll go back into a little bit of history, not too deep, but history is very important, not that we want to really rest on the laurels, but history is very important because we always go back to the history and pick a few lessons and become wiser and begin to do our job wherever we are in a slightly different and a better way. If we really go back to the Greek society, way back 500 BC, we saw very blatantly and very evidently that Greeks were the ones who designed a new ecosystem where they began to say that there is a definitive role for the businesses in the society. And businesses cannot grow unless the society they operate within is equally strong. So they began to say that there is a role for the business in the society, and that began to transform societal structure and began to support the businesses as well. And this thing then, spiraled and came to every other country, including India. And therefore, that was kind of the beginning of the whole history, whereby businesses were given a role to play, but then not at the expense of the well-being that they also needed to secure for the people within which they operated and they ran the businesses. And this is how the philanthropy concept came into being. And businesses then began to give money, and that money was given to people or institutions, which was one-time money. And nobody knew what was really the impact of the money which was given by businesses to institutions purely on philanthropy, because it was one-time money given and forgotten. And then we had businesses, on the other hand, making a lot of money and not really doing anything. And therefore, people began to think that if this is the kind of a scenario, society is going to be in trouble. And therefore, the whole idea of social business or social entrepreneurship came in, which meant that someone having enough money or making enough money will also try to see to it as to how a part of that money could be given by that person or that entity or that institution to community and society, whereby community and society, alongside the well-being and profit-making of the business, can also continue. And this is how this whole new idea of social enterprise and social entrepreneurship began to shape up. And this began to shape up pretty quickly around 1980s, when we had many companies and many businesses in the West and Europe, and also in India, who began to put a little bit of extra thought in terms of how do they really deploy a part of the money, a part of the profit, onto the well-being and welfare of the community and the people. And this is where the whole societal ecosystem began to change, and began to change for the good. And I would only like to give one example from outside and one quick example from India. The outside example could be, in Asia, India is a part of Asia, and we all live, and we have several dichotomy within our social structure. And the previous colleague said it, we are having different attitude, different standards, yardsticks, to just things on the ground, and that has got to change. And that has got to change in a very, very significant way, because we have no time to lose. And therefore, we have inequality, we have difficulties, we have many people who go without food every day without our knowing it. And therefore, Asian and African and even European societies have had certain things where they needed to depend on the businesses for their well-being. And therefore, I'll take only one example of a food company, which is founded in Spain, but they're now headquartered in France. It is Danone. And Danone is a food company which makes yogurt. And with the yogurt, they serve a very lower strata of society, especially the children, born in societies where people will not have enough money to feed their children. And this is a reality in our society, and we can't really turn our eyes away. So they came up with the idea of giving 30% of the profit for society, whereby they will produce yogurt, we will have micronutrients, and they said that this yogurt, if given to children under the age of 7, twice in a week, and if they continue to eat it for 9 or 10 months, they will begin to grow healthier, they will have no disease, and they will be more able-bodied, men are women when they grow. So here is the example of Danone, which did a great job, and they're known for what they've done, and they continue to do it in their own way. Secondly is Tata. Tatas in India have been at the front and center, and they have also been supporting many social enterprises, which in turn are trying to ensure that while making money is okay, but social impact becomes the defining moment for these people. And therefore, when you look at Tata in India and Danone in France, we would very quickly realize that they tried to change the ecosystem by giving more education, more insights, focusing on the well-being of the people, and seeing to it as to which are the kind of very important problems which the need to really deal with, not only deal with by lip service, but deal with by giving the money, the competence, the resources, both technical and administrative, and see to it that while they grow and develop, communities and societies also continue to develop. And you can very easily see when we take the name of Tata or Danone in Europe, there's a lot of respect in people when they take these names. And there are many other names, but for the sake of time and interest of time, I'm not really going to go into it. And therefore, I can safely say, in the changing time, things are really going to change, and businesses have got to be very, very agile to the change and see the kind of writing on the wall. And while that writing on the wall is very evident, they will also need to see to it that while they do all of this, they have got to really put a lot of focus on gender equality as well. We all know from our own country's example, from outside as well, that when you really employ women in your business or through the supply chain, you see that, there's a different kind of a growth factor which is getting embedded. And there are several reports and lessons, including what the UN did about 10 years back when they came out with Women Empowerment Principle, and I had some role to play there. And we all said the moment we put women into the supply chain and within the businesses, the possibility would be that businesses will really grow faster, create more inclusion and equity, and also see to it that, which was more substantive part, that by having women on the soft floor within the company in the boardrooms, it was seen and estimated that the stock shares of the companies which have more than 20% of the workforce as women will more likely have a scenario where the stock prices will go up by 20%. And therefore, there is no contradiction at all in three things. One, that there is already a social contract being talked and being looked around, and that will happen. And that social contract will be between the business and the people. Secondly, there's a lot of business sense for companies to see to it that they must, and I'm not really talking about the CSR here at all. I'm only talking about how companies will like to put more money from their profits, which can directly go into the society and transform the society in a way where people are happier and they have better well-being. And finally, we must ensure at all levels that we have greater representation of the women in the boardrooms. It is happening across Europe. It is happening across Africa. It is happening across everywhere. So we in India cannot really afford to lag behind, because there's a lot of business sense and there's a lot of business case and companies and businesses being able to look at these scenarios and read the writing on the wall and begin to take action before it is too late. So I would like to thank you again, Madam Chair, for this opportunity for me to be able to share some views for the larger debate, and I'll be very happy to come back and answer any questions
Thank you.
which you might have.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Listening to you, two things were going through my mind. One is that, in India we have these sayings. In Hindi, it says, Ganga Nahaliya, which means that you can screw around with anybody, but then if you go and take a dip in the Ganga, everything gets washed away. And in the Muslim world, of course, they say, Chuha kaake billi mekke gayi, which is the same, that you have destroyed something, and then you go and try and get pure. And we see it every day in business houses that screw the earth and screw the people and continue building temples and giving 1,000 crores as a crown to Balaji and this, that, and the other. Does that make sense? Or is that guilt assuaging? The second thing is that even when companies give genuinely, hugely to philanthropy, should they be looking at their supply chains as well or not? Because Nike, for instance, gives a lot of money for women in sports and other things, for young girls, for adolescent girls. But we have known what Nike does in Bangladesh when that building collapsed and 800 women died. We know the kind of exploitative work that Nike does in other parts. So we need a society, I think, that looks at every strata of work. And the third thing I wanted to say is that if it is so obvious that women bring in a different aspect and more women in boards have led to, universally, have led to the profitability going up, if there are 3 or more women on a board, why aren't men realizing this and changing? I'll come back to you with that one. Tiffany has to leave very soon. Tiffany, thank you. We will miss you for the question and answer session, but I believe you have another call to take. So thank you for sharing your concerns, and I'm sure that my audience here and all the people who are listening to this on the web will take note of the concern that needs to be addressed on disability, accessibility, and sensitization of the larger public for disability. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much. And I hope that I can leave you all with this thought that gender and disability go hand in hand. Equal pay for women and men is always said, equal kind of work, but also women with disabilities have been forgotten. Domestic violence is the shadow pandemic, and a lot is happening among women with disabilities. I do urge everyone in this conference that women with disabilities are considered. And as my topic of generating social change, I stand for gender and disability. Thank you, Malika ma'am.
Thank you.
I'm really glad to have shared the stage with you and Prudence sir and everyone else in Gender Park. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Hello, I'm audible. Comrades, lal salam to people, human beings around. Dear Ms. Chair, I'm wondering what is this engendering social change? Harmonizing social gains with profit making. To be very frankly telling, I'm still now not able to understand these terminologies. Thank you, applause for that please. The thing I need to only say that I remember 2016, the ICGE which took place, first time in the world that the issue of transgender section was included in the state of Kerala, that the government of Kerala. I think for that, across the nation, there was so much appreciations for the Kerala government. Thank you, Kerala government, for again bringing back to the issues of sexual minorities and gender minorities are concerned. Dear Chair, as we all know that the country is an undeclared emergency nation, yeah, activists around the media space, the activist voices, the constitutional spaces, and the constitutional values, being the political representatives to across sections of the constitution, has been totally shrinked in the name of power and politics. And that shall be brought to this floor. With that permission, I would like to express, to give me permission to express my views under my right to expression is concerned. If you say yes, I go with that. Yeah? Thank you. My friends Mariam is also here from IDWA, and also Professor Baby Shamili, he is also here, my old friends. Thank you for being here, present. Dear Chair, I'm really confused what I want to speak here today. What is gender? What is sex? And what is sexuality? We are speaking this for more than 20-25 years. It is not about a victory of Kalki Subramaniam. It is not a victory of Sheetal. It is not a victory of Geeta Amma. It is not a victory of Soumya. It is not a victory of Akkai Padmashali. It's a victory of the movement. Why I say this? When the whole community was agitating in the streets for more than 30 years, for what? Not to be a wisdomized person, not to be a capitalist, not to be the rich of the richest or the poor of the poorest. We only said we want to live with human dignity. We want our identity recognition. We want our housing. We want education, employment. We want to be transformed from male to female, female to male. I think the basic question of the principles of the Constitution, which has guaranteed that we want to lead a life with dignity, and dignity means to me whether I want to be a sex worker, whether I want to be a trans man, whether I want to be a trans woman or a lesbian, gay, bisexual, I decide my gender and I decide my sexuality, including you. The state has no business and intervene. I should be like this as perfect. If that's so, my Constitution has given me the right to say no to that. Yeah? With all of this, the Honorable Supreme Court of 2000 verdict did not come so easily. Many people who gave up their lives, who were killed, who were assassinated, who were kidnapped, who were raped, who were brutally beaten up, many things happened, yeah? And in the name of Section 377, we were the direct effectors of it. And we were criminalized. Assume a world, assume a country, assume a nation where you were criminals from 1860s to 2009, you were decriminals in 2009, you were re-criminals in 2013/14, again you were no more criminals in 2018 by the Honorable Constitution Bench of the Supreme Court of India. My question, Chair, why did India play such pathetic role in people's life? Why did India play such pathetic role in disturbing the movement of politics of sexuality and gender? If someone who has judged from top to the bottom or bottom to the top, I want to question on the grounds of morality. And what is morality? I question on the grounds of sexuality morality, gender morality, not about your religious beliefs, not about your class beliefs, not about tradition beliefs, not about culture beliefs. I want to talk about my constitutional morality. You were judged in that form. The 2014 Supreme Court verdict was delivered on the exact date of Ambedkar Jayanti. Ambedkar Jayanti, April 14th is Ambedkar Jayanti. April 15th was the NALSA judgment. NALSA is the National Legal Services Authority of the country. The judgment came. We are recognizing as third gender before the Constitution. Ms. Chair, I question who is first gender, who is second gender, and who is third gender. I think the voice came through. Gender is not about boxing. It is not about norms. It's not about someone decides for a gender. If so, down. I decide my gender, and gender is that flexibility, that's fluidity, irrelevant of your sex and psychology. You can be whatever you want to. That's the movement agitation. I feel proud, Ms. Chair. Why? The entire issue of love, sex, the politics of gender, sexuality. Today people are speaking in open. I want to directly contribute the movement of sexual minorities. If we were not speaking these terminologies 30 years ago, I don't think we were coming together like this. I salute to my movement of sexual minorities. Ms. Chair, the NALSA judgment has given in 2014. Very immediately after that, the 2016, the Kerala state became the first state to bring up the draft policy for transgender. Then was the Karnataka policy. I'm so happy that these developments happened across the country in few parts of the states. The NALSA judgment, the policy, again the Transgender Act is concerned. As you know, Ms. Chair, the country is known for so much of revolutions, known for many other aspects, how the voices have been stringed in the name of power and politics. In that way, CAA, how many of you know CAA? Yeah, so what is CAA? Sorry, Ms. Chair, it is not that. Country agitating against Citizenship Amendment Act. The entire country is agitating for what? Not only for CAA. In the name of CAA, the Farmers Act, we all know that. The Transgender Act, the Triple Talaq Act, yeah, the labor laws, the Sabarimala verdict. So what, chair? If I'm a woman with penis or vagina, whatever, if I'm periods, why does my God see this in such an untouchable way? My God and Goddess has never seen that in the untouchable way. We feel proud to be for menstruated. And Ayyappa has never said this. And people also refer chair as a classical dancer of this world. Maybe you might be knowing so good. Harihara Putra Ayyappa. Hari was a man and Hara was a man, chair. The two men coming with penis and performing sex cannot be happening any procreation. I can challenge on the ground of scientific reason. Chair, I remember, be it Harihara Putra, be it Shiva Parvati, be it Lakshmi, be it Narayana, be it Brahma, Vishnu Maheshwara, be it my Pope, be it my Allah, be it my Mullah, whatever, who is aware. I think the interpretation of that men context to this 20th, 21st century has distracted, has really brought in such a space to us for not to raise our voices. You know, with that, Ms. Chair, I also wanted to say that the Transgender Act, any such ridiculous act that the country was agitating, like how CAA was, how the Farmers Act was, how the Women Reservation Bill of 33% was agitating against, like that, Ms. Chair. The Transgender Act, which gives certain amount of privilege, and what is a privilege? My magistrate, who wants to examine my sex, who wants to remove my clothes and examine me, if the magistrate certifies you are a man or a woman or a transgender, intersex, whatever, then I can get my certificate. Okay, you are eligible to access the social entitlements. Ms. Chair, I want to ask a question directly to you. Have you been examined by the magistrate? Have you been? If not you, then why we? This is called the ridiculous act of this country, and the parliament did not show its consensus, did not show its support. It just wanted to bring for the sake of done, we are done with that. Ms. Chair, the Transgender Act also criminalizes either one of the way of criminalizing sex work and begging. If you are having a plan and thought process of criminalizing it, what is alternative option? And as a person from the community, I am part of the Hijra culture too. I want to wish to do my sex work. I want to wish to do my sex work. If I am with my consent, with my consensuality, with my willingness, what is your business there? I want a state which supports my ambition. It's not what state will decide and I should follow it, yeah? I think that's what the left politics talks about. We, the people, we want to be with people. We want to talk about people's issue. That's the perspective of the left, not the capital thinking perspective. Dear Chair, I also felt so sorry to talk about this. The 377 judgment came. The transgender judgment also came. When we're talking about the engendering issue, in the name of profit making and loss making, I really don't know what exactly to speak on that issue, without we addressing the issues of the vulnerable section or the socially excluded groups, especially the more vulnerable than the vulnerable. You got it? It is highly difficult for a largest democracy to address the economical justice system. Yeah? Why I say this? India accepted poverty just 3-4 years back. How? Providing 10% reservation for the upper caste backward classes. I think it shows India has accepted the poverty. And you cannot, the political leaders cannot make big bhashans. Let's accept the fact, yeah? What is the global economy is doing here? So much of global inflation, unemployment, no proper education, totally everything is being commercialized. You are most privileged, you can access. I am not privileged. As a sex worker, as a sex worker child, as a transgender, adopted child, our kids are really not privileged. There is a discrimination in the system of education. How do we tackle that? Dear Chair, at the same time, I have some amount of my frank opinion that needs to be brought before the floor. I'm just taking 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes. Very saddening part, I received a warning that the National Council for Transgender has had its meeting, and the first meeting of the minutes. And the minutes says, Chair, we appreciate the government in upholding the rights of transgender. I'm really wondering what they're upholding. And my other co-colleague says it. the members of the committee should be definitely brought this information before and ensure that there's active participation. My friend, other member of the council says, these people are from the transgender community. Miss Meera Parida, she says, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas is coming out to be true. Miss Chair, I want a question. Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas, Sabka Sarvanash Hokta. Dear Chair, on this ground, I don't want to accept the minutes of this first meeting. The representation was undemocratic. If the government is concerned about talking the gender politics, about the inclusivity of other gender from, like irrelevant of your sex, gender, sexuality, whatever, why did not the government consult its process? Why it intentionally made in the pandemic situation? It was so haraturi to just pass all the acts in the parliament. Is it my... Exactly. I think my question was it so necessary, I am asking? Convenient. Chair to that convenient. No to acceptance for this convenient. If that's so, many acts were given as passed as the ordinance, and that ordinance is affecting us. And we have the direct effects of it. Yeah? With that, Chair, in that so, I think one of my friends talks about, if you ask me, Akai, what exactly you want? I don't want my mandir. I don't want my mandir to be built there. If you ask me, do you want mandir or my livelihood? I choose my livelihood. I choose my respect. I choose my dignity. I choose my protection and rights. Mandir, mosque, church, everything comes as second priority for me. That's my belief. And respecting that in the largest democracy, the cultural plurality has come together to accept that's a nation that we are talking about today. Chair, if you ask me, yes, I stand for a non-discrimination world. I stand for ethical/qualitative education. I stand for definitely alternative options or opportunities. I stand for yes for livelihood, If you ask me what is livelihood, the social, political, cultural, economical, traditional system, if that has been stabled, everything gets automatically settled. I think my political parties in the country are really not thinking in that perspective. If so, I want to stand again talk about the issues of global economy, how it has been inflated. It's not a question of what we did for the last 70 years. What are we now doing here? People are just dying. In the name of COVID, corona, pandemic, you have looted the country. Crores and crores and crores of money people have been taken away and they're happily living in London. Vijay Mallya. Where is Vijay Mallya? What has happened to my law of the constitution? That's people's money, yeah? That's our money. With this chair, if my governments are talking about how do we sustain the economical system in the entire nation and specifically for the state of Kerala, I have two suggestions, Chair. I want to place this suggestion. Maybe my documentalists are going to take up this. One, why can't there's a section, I want to remember Nalini Jamil, who was a sex worker. Yeah? And also one of my transgender friend who got killed and murdered because she was the most powerful voice in the state of Kerala just 4 or 5 years ago. Remembering them as my co-friends and co-colleagues, why can't my state of Kerala legalize sex work? The legalization of sex work should be part of your legislative systems. Then you collect your taxes, protect the rights of sex workers, and ensure there's a social debate on that issue. Number two, Chair, I also want to suggest the government of Kerala to have a system when it's come to many aspects of the transgender section is concerned. I know it's working so progressively. I wish you all the best again for the most successful, for all of this section that the entire state of Kerala is talking about. From medical to your death. From a medical to your death, we request the government of Kerala to constitute a transgender welfare board, but the National Council of Transgender says it has to be implemented as a council in the state. It's again the notion of the right-wing politics, and I don't want to accept this. I only want the welfare board for transgender in the Kerala state, and Kerala state should become a model to the globe. And that board should consist of many majority of the female to male to male to female transgender, intersex, intergender communities. If that's so, Chair, if that's so, I want to pledge, or I want to promise to say that whatever the government of Kerala takes a huge step in context to the mainstreaming issues of the entire vulnerable section, not only transgender, not only sex worker, irrelevant of your class, caste, region, religion, ethnicity, whatever, I think as a movement, as a sexual minority community, we are here to support the government of Kerala's notion. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, people.
Akkai was talking as though I was the government of India. I'm on your side. Okay, we have our last speaker waking up in America, Ruchira Gupta, who is at the forefront of, hi Ruchira, at the forefront of bringing legislation on child sex trafficking and sex trafficking in general. She has formed, hi Ruchira, good morning.
Good morning.
Have you had your coffee yet?
I have it next to me.
Okay, we shall forgive you for sipping it while you talk to us. I quite understand your dilemma about the timing of this. Ruchira, we have had a very diverse panel because actually of the three speakers, only one spoke on the topic that's supposed to be. We had Tiffany Brar, who spoke about being disabled and a woman in a country where both are curses, and the necessity of understanding, sensitizing, and making possible for disabled people to become mainstream and have the access and the respect that they must have. And we had Akkai here talking about the whole issue of transgender and what it means to be the third gender, and why, who said that men and women are the first and second gender anyway. She has appealed to the government of Kerala to bring in a transgender board that will look after them from birth to death and have a welfare attitude. What was your other demand? Oh yes, and the second was that sex work needs to be legalized with all the benefits that has, and the protection and the health benefits and the health sureties that sex workers have with that. Puran spoke about what this panel is supposed to be about, which is how do you change the social contracts between various parts of society in order to bring about or to veer away from the avaricious greed of capitalism that we see. And through the pandemic, our richest in India have become 37% more rich, while most people have lost everything they have. How do we veer them away from this into understanding that the environment, every human being attached to the corporation as a consumer or as a worker, and profits have to be balanced? So that was just bringing you up to this, but good morning and welcome. Over to you. You have 20 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. I wish I was in Kerala with all of you, because it must be warm and lovely, and here it is snowing. So I think about all of you. Also, I would have loved to be with all the women who are leaders and change makers. It would have been heaven to be with all of you. So I'm sad to be here, but I'm happy to be part of this panel discussion, especially with Malika, who's such an old friend and somebody who I respect so deeply. Thank you for including me in this panel. Before I begin to talk about the topic, I'll just talk a little bit about myself, because the personal is the political in my case. And I used to be a journalist, and for about 14 years in India. Started with a newspaper in Calcutta and ended up with a national magazine in Delhi. And one of the turning points in my life when I began to see the importance of gender was as a journalist. So I wasn't, marginalized at home. I saw the gender discrimination more in public spaces. The first time I began to notice gender discrimination was in the newspaper itself, where I saw that, women's issues were treated as cultural and issues related to men were treated as political. Women journalists were told to go and cover the university beat, the gardening beat, etc., etc. And male journalists were given the more important assignments. In terms of promotion, too, it was always in the time that I went, and even now, there was a supremacy of the male editor, the patriarch who would be there. And very often it was the editor who would flirt with the people in the office, and as a reward, they would get promoted more easily. And it was a very, very, in short, a very sexist atmosphere. And in my own work, I realized that because I had grown up in a socialist household where all hierarchies were challenged all the time. The hierarchy of caste, of course, was a big thing which was always up for discussion. Class, of course, was a big thing which was always discussed in our home in Calcutta and thought about. But also, because I learned that hierarchies were not normal, I would also challenge the hierarchy of gender. For example, all my life I never learned to cook because my brother was not taught to cook. And I would say that why should I be taught a gender stereotypical role? So I was against role segregation. And it was only to my horror that when I joined a newspaper, which was both liberating because I was working, I was earning money, I was, in an independent atmosphere without any parents or friends or family. And I was learning a skill. I was learning how to edit in those days. But also the atmosphere, the general atmosphere of the paper was very sexist. And that was when I saw that women definitely were treated as lesser human beings. And very soon, of course, I moved from Calcutta to Delhi. I joined as the political reporter for a mainstream magazine. And there, the atmosphere was less sexist. I think the bigger cosmopolitan cities might be less sexist. But one of the things was that there was a campaign. I began to report on the rise of the religious right at that time. And I began to cover this all-male paramilitary organization known as the RSS. I wrote a long piece about that, and at that time they were just starting to respond to mobilizing an all-India campaign called the Rath Yatra. It was basically a bus in which this man who became India's home minister subsequently, Advani, was traveling through India, inviting people to come to Ayodhya to break a mosque. And I really thought that it was just a mobilization campaign, and they would never actually, a mainstream political party would not commit an illegal act. But I followed Advani, and on 6 December 1992, which really was a turning point in the history of our country, and it was also a turning point in my life, because when the mosque was being destroyed, I actually went inside the mosque to see what was going on. Because in those days, as a journalist, we were trained not to depend on secondary sources. We went to the spot, we asked questions of the people who were inside there, saw for ourselves as much as we could. So I had gone there, and I was wearing jeans and a shirt. I had a hanky on my head because it was really hot, so I put a wet hanky on my head. And when I went inside this mosque, it was packed body to bed, body, all men. So obviously I did not look like anybody there. And the car sevaks, these followers of the BJP, began to attack me because I clearly was not one of them, and they wanted to silence me and molest me at the same time. So they started shouting Babar ki aulad and maar do Musalman, and some people were strangling me to death, and some people were pulling at my shirt, some people were pinching my breasts and poking my hips, and one of them, and I couldn't get the words out, who I was, what was I doing, because I was choking. But luckily for me, one of them said, let's take her outside. And I think the intention was rape, because you can't rape if you don't have enough space. The whole place was packed body to body. So there was a trench dug around the mosque, and they dragged me outside there. And Uh, my shirt was, of course, my shirt buttons broke, and I think I would have been raped and murdered if it was today's India. But luckily for me, there was a man I'd interviewed the day before, and he was from Bihar, where my family has a connection to, and I spent a lot of time there in this village in Bihar. And so I had interviewed him the day before, and we'd struck a sort of a bond based on region, Bihar. And he jumped in and he said, no, no, she's a journalist and she's from Bihar, she's not a Muslim, leave her alone, we'll get into trouble, she's a journalist. And he tried to help me. His leg was broken in the process, his head began to bleed, they hit him on the head. But they did run away. And he asked me where I wanted to go to, so I went back to the roof of the house from which all these political leaders, including L.K. Advani, were making speeches. And I somehow went back and I reached and I saw Advani watching the homes of small Muslim shanties, which are normally spring up around mosques, being burnt. So I went to him and I said that, please stop, and you must know that they are burning homes, they're attacking women, they're attacking journalists. Your followers have gone out of control, and you must announce on the mic to stop these attacks. So he said, no, this is a very historic day. Forget about what has happened to you and celebrate, eat some sugar. And he tried to, his guard tried to give me some sugar to eat. So I was a bit surprised and I said that, houses are burning, whose houses are these? So he said that these are Muslims burning their own houses for compensation from the government of India. And in that moment, I understood that this man not only was in complete control of the situation, but he was the leader, of course, of the situation, deciding who would speak when, what they would speak, and to the point that, that he would control everything that was going on. And he was gaslighting me, saying, forget what happened to you. He was trivializing my testimony, that this is a historic day for India, forget what is going on with you, it's not important. And so I said, no, I don't want to eat your sugar, and I'm taking notes, and I moved away from him. So that was my first understanding of how a political leader could openly flout not just rules, Government of India rules, and break a mosque, but also how sexist they were, that they did not even care when someone who they were instigating to violence was attacking someone that they had traveled for about a week with, who was standing next to them, who was a citizen of India, a woman. And then I somehow made my way back to Delhi in a car, and some journalists collected outside the press club. So I announced on TV that day that they had a psychopathic gleam in their eyes, and that was when the second phase of my life began, where I learned by fire what it meant to be a woman who went public about speaking up. Because I decided to testify in all the commissions of inquiry which were set up about this illegal act. So as an eyewitness. So I spoke about it at the Press Council, the Bahari Tribunal, and at the Liberhans Commission. And my car was stalked, vandalized, I was physically followed. Those were not internet days, they were actually people turning up physically. And on the mic, etc., people would phone me, and they would breathe heavily, they would tell my editor to sack me. But what was also more troubling was that when I showed up in court, the judges of the BJP, Bajrang Dal, RSS, VHP would ask me very sexist questions. Questions like, do you smoke cigarettes? Do you act in TV serials? Where are your scratch marks? Did you do it for publicity? Do you believe in God? Is there any photograph of God in your house? Do you have any male friends? So basically, because they could not silence me, they could not, they began to attack my credibility and try and shame me into silence. And I still continue to testify, but then more insidiously what I found was that with the rise of the religious right, how the mindset in India was also changing. And there were friends and associates who began to say, why did you even go inside the mosque when you knew there was a mob there? Or what kind of clothes were you wearing? Surely you could have worn a salwar kameez. Or, the blame was always mine, not just by the political leaders, but by society in general. And so I decided to give it all up after a year in sheer disgust, and pushed off to Nepal after all my testifying and all was done. to see how villagers were managing the natural resources for a UN journal. And that's when I stumbled upon villages which had no girls. And I was a bit surprised, and I began to ask the question, where are the girls? And of course, as a good journalist, I followed the trail, and I found that there was a smooth supply chain from the villages of Nepal to the brothels of Bombay. I ended up making a documentary on the subject, and this was the second turning point in my life, because when I was in Bombay, I saw 9-year-old girls, 12-year-old girls, 13-year-old girls being raped by 8, 10 men a night, 50-year-old men. And as a journalist, of course, I'd covered war and famine and hunger and caste conflict and religious conflict. But I had never seen this kind of deliberate and intimate violence at this scale, factory-like scale in my life. So, and because of possibly what had happened to me, and I had seen trivialization and marginalization and silence, and because I had been on the verge of rape and death, I empathized more, and I ended up making a documentary called The Selling of Innocence with full passion, won an Emmy for Outstanding Investigative Journalism. And then I felt that journalism was not enough, it was limiting, and I wanted to do more for the social change that I wanted to see. I was quite influenced by Gandhi, and he used to talk about be the change that you want to see. And so I thought, I want to do more. And so I quit journalism without knowing how to do it. I was not an MBA, or I didn't know how to make business plans. But I went back to the women, and I sat down in a circle with them in the brothel, and I asked them what we should do. And they had 4 dreams at that time. And those 4 dreams became our business plan. They said that they wanted school for their children because they wanted to save their children from intergenerational prostitution. They said they wanted a job in an office because in a brothel, there is no old age pension. The old age pension is disease and death. There is a lot of violence, both from the customers and the pimps and the brothel managers who control the brothel system. There's a lot of debt bondage, so most of the time the girls who are trafficked are kept in a sort of a slavery-like situation, where all the money earned actually is used to pay off the amount for the bed on the brothel, for the food they eat, for the water they drink, for the toilet they use, if they have children, for the children who also spend time. So they're constantly in debt for the protection money to the policeman, for the hafta that it's called, and also for the muscle man who looks after them. So all of this basically cuts into their money, plus for their medical expenses and makeup and clothes and all of that. So, I saw this, and I decided that the second thing, a job in an office, really meant a job with dignity and sustainability. We talk about sustainable development goals, and really clearly prostitution was not a sustainable occupation because of the intimate body contact which the girls and the women were subjected to, which led to disease and death ultimately. The third dream that the women in prostitution had was a room of their own. Now, I was an English literature student, and all of you in the Gender Park will understand what that means. I had read Virginia Woolf, and I was actually hearing Virginia Woolf in the brothels of Bombay. And they said, we will stop drinking even if we get something this big of our own, and they stretched their arms. And I just loved hearing that, because I could see that in a brothel there were 4 rooms stuffed into one, 4 beds stuffed into a small room with iron bars. Children were playing on the floor while the women serviced the customers. 20 rooms attached to one toilet, so access to water and toilets was really hard. They would cook on the floor, there was noise, the vendors were coming, customers were coming. And many of you may have read a Manto story called 100-watt bulb, in which the woman in prostitution actually begins to suffer from insomnia, because a customer comes to her anytime, night or day, and her pimp will not let her refuse. And finally she kills the customer and sleeps peacefully. So it was really a situation like that. And Then the fourth thing they said, was that they wanted the customers and their traffickers to be punished. They said that those who have brokered away our dreams, those who bought and sold us, must be punished. So this became our business plan, and we decided to rent a room in a municipal school, hire a teacher, and begin to prepare the kids for school. And the model was, of course, organizing in circles and to speak collectively to do all of this. And that is how my own journey began into being an activist, and to come to the point about engendering social change and harmonizing social gains with profit making. So what happened was that as I began to work on sex trafficking, and this was something I thought there'll be hardly any polarization or debate on. Like everybody will want to make sure that the last girl, as I call her, and the last girl to me is really based on the concept of unto the last from John Ruskin and Gandhi, the most vulnerable of human beings. And to me, she's that 13-year-old in a brothel. And her intersecting inequalities are, of course, that she's poor, she's female, she's mostly from dominated and oppressed castes, and she's a teenager, so she has no control over her life and her decisions. So I thought that there would be no dispute about that. Her prostitution is marked by absence of choices, and we have to work hard to increase her choices, and also to create mechanisms, just like we have done in the domestic violence movement, to punish her perpetrator. Because this was a demand-driven industry, and as long as there was a demand, I knew that there were enough poor girls, last girls across the country that traffickers could prey on. So I began to work on that issue, but to my horror, I found there was polarization around this. There were those who said that the traffickers should not be punished. It was work like any other work, that the pimps and the prostitutes should be renamed as employers and workers. And I could not see any way that this was work. So this debate began, that how do you engender social change and take in the voice of the most excluded, the last girl, in deciding what the policy should be, and where does the profit end, and where does a social gain and a sustainable livelihood begin for that last girl, and where do you begin to talk about choices? Because surely her choice and her need for a condom was the 8th or the 9th thing she needed. The first thing she needed was school and housing and food, and many other things, and legal protection from being trafficked to the brothels. And one of the, a lot of people said that please call her sex worker and please call her pimp and employer and all of that. People I'd been to college with, my feminist friends, my friends on the left, because obviously, clearly, I was very much a part of all the social justice movements. And the thing that I found was that this was debated, and I was told that no, you have to talk about it as work. And I grew up in Calcutta. I understand labor struggles very, very well. And I try to think about, from the point of view of Engels and Marx and other leaders, that how could something which was which I call body invasion, because it was literally not like any other sweatshop work. The one thing different in this was that the body was invaded and it had physical and mental health consequences. So there was inherent harm to this. How could this be called work? So I tried to look at it from the point of view of labor struggles. And the first thing that I saw was that all labor struggles aspire for minimum wages. In prostitution, there was no such thing as minimum wage. In fact, the girl would fetch the most money for the brothel keeper or the pimp on her first day in the job. And then steadily her earnings would go down as she began to look older, as she began to have more diseases, etc. And, in fact, Naya Mal, as it was known in the red light areas, always fetched a higher price. Virgins fetched a higher price. The youngest I have met is a 7-year-old. So I really didn't think minimum wage was possible in prostitution. And also, who would negotiate the minimum wage for someone who was starving? She would earn more in the beginning of the night and less as the night wore on, because she was starving and the brothel manager would beat her up if there was no income. The second thing that labor struggles aspire for is old age pension. And in prostitution, first of all, there is no one to give this old age pension. And the second is that there is also the issue of the old age pension here is really disease and death. Because with repeated body invasion, and this again another writer, Kamleshwar, has written beautifully in a story called River of Flesh, the woman develops all kinds of diseases. Now in COVID, we don't even like anyone to cough near us. Imagine someone who has intimate skin contact. Some of the customers are unbathed, some are disease-ridden, some are passing on sexually transmitted diseases because they believe that sex with
Ruchira, I'm going to have to ask you, Ruchira, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up in the next couple of minutes.
Oh, okay, fine. Okay, I'll just cover the last 2 points
Yes,
and
of
then
course.
quickly wrap up. Okay, and then so the third thing that labor struggles aspired to was, first was minimum wages, second was old age pension, third was working conditions. And again, while some of the working conditions could be legislated with in terms of putting bulbs and cleanliness, etc., and have bouncers. Two things which could not be legislated was intimacy. The customer would be ultimately alone with the woman, and he would penetrate her body because that was what he was buying, and sometimes, be very violent, like stubbing cigarette butts out on her or shoving bottles up her vagina. And the fourth thing was dignity. And here the woman had to sexualize her body, desexualize her body. So this was not based on legalization or not legalization, it was based on the commodification of the human body. And that is when I realized that this could not be called labor, but we had to struggle for gender equality so that women would have more choices and we would have real choices. And that is when I realized that profit has become so normal and the market has become so normal that my friends on the left or the right all began to think if somebody pays for it, if there is a market and the market decides then anything is all right, even something which we would call inherently exploitative. So the definition of exploitation changed over the years. And today, as we see fascism eroticizing violence, we have to understand so does pornography. And so does the use and the normalizing of prostitution. It is eroticizing violence. And what is at stake here is that what do we define as exploitation? And what are the gains of the labor struggles that we give up when we fight for this? So we have to really think through these things very carefully as we talk about engendering social change. And can profit and social gain go together, and who will regulate it and how? Because gender digs a trench into our brain into which all other inequalities fall. Because it's at home that we first realize that it's all right for one group of human beings to order and one to obey. And we begin to look up to the head of the family as the right person taking good or bad decisions, because that's our comfort zone. And then we begin to go out and accept all hierarchies as normal and begin to vote in even a bully as the head of the state.
As we well know. Thank you very much, Ruchira. I'm going to throw open the floor for questions. Please raise your hands, and if there are any questions that have come, is somebody there, can a mic please be taken? You can take one of these two mics.
Check.
Mic has gone there.
Questions? Can somebody raise their hand? Did not see that.
No questions from the floor?
Surprising.
Are there any questions that have come on the internet?
None so far. We're just giving
None
them
so
a
far.
little
Okay, good. I just wanted to go back a little bit because, today we talk of intersectionality. And I think this session has really been about intersectionality. Because when you talk of social change, or when you talk of behavior change, or when you talk of sustainability, you are talking at the same moment at so many different levels. And one of the things I always tell women who I speak to is what she said about being the change. Do you treat your son and daughter differently? do you treat your husband or your father and mother differently? Because if you do, then you are a part of that evil system that is dominating you. And if we can change that, then it will change. I know this as a mother. My 2 children were a social experiment. I think my parents made us into a social experiment without knowing it, so we came out ungendered, uncaste-like. And I have to tell you a funny story. Ruchira will know the story. You know, for the first 5 years when my son was born, I was on this huge project called the Mahabharata by a director called Peter Brook. And there were people from 22 different countries. Pink, yellow, brown, black, gray, blue, every kind of skin color and every kind of hair. And my son was 3 weeks old when I went, and he was 5 years old when we came back. And he just couldn't figure out India. He was bored by everybody with black hair and couldn't understand what had happened to the world. So really, the way we bring up our children is the way of breaking down these intersectionalities. On the one hand, Ruchira is talking about, and Akka is talking about personal dignity, personal choice, and whether you can legislate that choice. When we talk of feminism and empowerment, we are not saying that if you choose to be a housewife and look after the house, that is wrong. That is not wrong. Not having a choice is what is wrong. Being brainwashed into thinking this is the only way of being a sati is wrong. And I think each of us needs to understand this. If I want to do nothing, I should have the right to do that. But the tragedy is that the men in our society are so imprisoned in yaar tu to mard hai, that they will not dare to say, I want a wife who will keep me. So, you know, this gender thing needs to be on both sides. And as we heard in an earlier session, it's not only we who need to be empowered. Because if we go back empowered, we just get beaten up more in households. And I think what we are saying here is that we realize that everything needs to change. And everybody needs to change. We need to change our thinking. We can start with ourselves first. Every time we see a beautiful woman going past, let us not think, kaun samajhti, who is she? Which is what patriarchy has taught us to do. Or every time there is a successful woman, let us not say that, oh, she must have a sugar daddy, because she doesn't. Or maybe even if she does, she is part of that same patriarchy. And as Puran was saying, looking at supply chains and looking at, when we say a social contract has to change and the new social contract has to be not between the people and the government, but between the people and corporations, what is the farmers' protest going on? It's exactly that. And it's those farmers are there fighting for you and me and you because it is our democracy that is being crushed. So to say that those farmers are out there and they're only Punjabi farmers, wrong. They are citizens of this nation who want to uphold the constitution for each and every one of us. And as Akka said, that space is shrinking. So I want to take this public space to say, I salute the farmers every single instant. So there is a social contract. Puran, are you still there? There is a social contract that is being forced upon the government. And of course, the Godi media is completely turning it around and making them into terrorists and Naxals and this and that and so on and so forth. But we, the people, need to take back our words, our voice, so that all of these social contracts change, whether it is in the family, whether it is in the workplace, whether it is in our community, whether it is with our churches and temples, which have become pigsties of exploitation and the most right-wing thinking. I think all of these things need to change. So the task in front of us is enormous, but if we can do it first from the inside out, and if we can do it with each other, knowing that it is going to be a difficult path, it is going to be a path with lots of pitfalls, it's going to be a path where every single person is going to point to you and say, you are doing wrong, you are breaking our community, you are breaking our tradition. As a dancer, I will tell you that tradition is an organic thing. What I'm doing today, what I did 40 years ago, has become tradition today. What my mother did 60 years ago has become tradition today. We do not believe in a tradition which we put away in a glass case, lock up and don't dust every Diwali. That is not what tradition is. Tradition is something where we are deeply rooted, but the roots have to take not the poison, but only the nourishment. But then the roots are very clever. If you actually look at books on botany, roots are very clever and roots are very protective. There are forests where one root will take more water and give it to all the other trees that are weak. That is what we need to do. We need to find the roots which will take the good, our tradition which will take the good, throw out the bad, and reinterpret tradition. And this has to happen, Puran, as you said, on the level of the corporate, on the level of the contract between people and corporate, on our level between us and the government, and each of us individually and in a group. Ruchira, if you have any last comments, Puran, you or Akai, please go ahead. We have another 15 minutes. Puran, would you like to go first?
Yeah. You know, you said it, Chairman, Madam, that we need to do two things at the same time. One is that we need to sort of dissect the things and try and take them away in case they're not working, if things are not functional. I mean, what do we really do with our body sometimes? A finger in the hand goes, you know, bad. You go to the doctor, it doesn't get cured. What do you really do? You then try and figure a way out whereby you take it away so that it doesn't really infect your body as a whole. So at the one hand, we will have to really try and identify the disease, the problem, the trouble, and see to it that we can remove that part so that, you know, we don't really get into a scenario whereby we end up having our whole body infected. So my personal way out of all of these malaise would be that we have got to really identify with this passionate intensity, what is wrong, how much wrong, what can really be done about it. And this is what I was saying in the beginning, that social change theory is very amorphous because it is all about human relationship and interaction, which will go on to change social and cultural institutions. And over time, they will change the society. So you very rightly said that whatever we have been doing is organic, and it has to continue in a way that, you know, we don't really go on to contest it. So this is the one part that I would like to say. And secondly, my very brief observation on government and people, and this is a sovereign government. In India, like we have other sovereign governments elsewhere, we really have got to see to it that the government and the people come together and decide on certain non-negotiables. And these non-negotiables could only strengthen our democracy the way we have been practicing it. And again, I go back to what you said, whatever we did 30 years back in our family, in our society, we continue to do it and we continue to hold those values very dear. So if we were to depreciate values which have always strengthened us for the period of time, we cannot really take any chance to close our eyes, go ahead and destroy them. So these are the two very quick comments which I would like to give. In addition to saying that we need new social contract between parties, people to state to private sector and people. Because people somehow need to get out of that bondage of, previous decades and previous centuries, where we keep on surrendering everything down to somebody and somewhere. We need to really get out of that very tedious and assiduous kind of an ecosystem and try and keep our liberal values and values which we have practiced for so many decades and centuries in a fairly seamless way. So this is very brief. I would like to respond to some of your comments, and they're well in place, and I don't really disagree with them.
Thank you very much. There's a question, okay.
Yeah, ma'am. This is a question to all of the people in the panel. I'm not sure whether this is a political statement or political comment. Anyhow, once we talk about the tradition and their impact on the gender minority, sexuality minorities, or the marginalized gender as such, once we analyze the vote share went to Mr. Trump, who was completely homophobic and transphobic, and his policies were completely homophobic and transphobic. The gay community in United States of America, their vote were more with Mr. Trump, not with the inclusive Democrats or to Mr. Joe Biden. And once we analyze the LGBTQ plus community of India, many of them are supporting the Hindutva ideologies of the nation and not withstanding with the pro-LGBTIQA plus community, political parties, whereby there are people like Dr. Akai Patnashali who are politicians, but who are members of politicians, and there are trans community political parties in the state of Kerala as well as the nation, but the portion or the percentage with them who are supporting the LGBTQA plus communities are very less. So what have the panelists, including the chair, has got to tell on this or comment on this?
Stupid people will be stupid. You know, there are so many things that we get brainwashed with. And there are so many insecurities that a clever politician can brainwash you into thinking. So in the 2002 Gujarat genocide, for the first time, the Adivasis and the Dalits were turned against the Muslims. That has never happened before, because the Adivasis, Dalits and the Muslims are all extremely marginalized. But for the first time that happened. So they could brainwash them, and the same thing is happening just now. The very people, the very middle class, the very lower middle class, who has lost so much because of demonetization, who has lost so much because of COVID, will still like to listen to the magical speaking of the right wing and our Prime Minister, because somewhere deep down Indians are slaves. We like a feudal system. We don't want to take the decisions. I'm sorry if I'm upsetting people, but I genuinely believe that is true. That's why we are a Mai-Bap Raj. That's why we want, as Ruchira said, we want the head of the family to take the decisions. We don't want to take the decisions, but we want our freedom. I think independence and independence of thought means taking the risk where you will fall flat on your face. And I will give you a very simple example to tell you what I mean. I have lots of feminist friends who say, we don't know how to change a tire in a car. And I said, then you have no right to drive a car unless you want to do that. We don't know how to file our taxes. That's not what independence can be. That is not what independent thought can be. There are good things and there are awful things, and you need to grasp them both. Otherwise, you have no right demanding. And I think that is the case with a lot of people who follow Trump. Trump played into, and Ruchira, correct me, Trump played into the fact that a lot of middle American white, mostly men, felt that the immigrants were taking over, they were taking the best jobs, and a lot of the manufacturing, which they were blue-collar workers of, had gone to other countries. And Trump played on that insecurity. Like Trump is playing on the Hindu majority, like Mr. Modi and Amit Shah playing on the Hindu majority. The Hindus have never been victims in this country. Never, ever, ever. Just because you give minority rights to somebody else doesn't mean. It's like men saying, it's like Brahmins saying, oh, you know, we need reservation because we are so few and the Dalits are taking over. It's a fight. It's never going to be easy because human beings' brains are wired to take the easiest option. And the easiest option is never just, it is never fair, and it is never right. So you and I, my friend, will continue fighting. So be prepared.
I would love to hear from Akkai also.
I think you were missing in first part of this whole process. I think you came at the last. I think we
because I was
discussed a lot about
settling.
the politics of and the movement of sexual minorities here. I remember that was Trump Samrajya, and this is called Modi Samrajya. You know, I think somewhere if you talk about the entire movement agitation since 30 years, I was quoting about Kalki, Akkai, Saumya and other people. I think it's not about one person taking a credit for the entire movement agitation. The Supreme Court, two huge verdicts did not come so easily. I think many people have gave up their lives, sacrificed their lives. People were killed, assassinated. Things happen like that. And today we are sitting as equal citizens. And why is that? Because of the open-minded people's support for this entire movement. One. Number two, I think we also need to question back ourselves. You know, like Lakshmi Narayan Tripathi, who wants to bring the 8th Hindu Dharma Akhada. It's such a stupid notion. And all transgender are not Hindus. And You know, like as a person, I don't want to support the ideology of Hindutva, which is so much of dominance. Got it? There's so much of plurality. I think we need to bond with the constitution morality. You know, if you talk in that context, the movement agitation was from the left and center perspective, not the right wing perspective. So saddening part, Chair, we also have now this group called Right Wing Transgender Sexual Minorities Hub. They only talk about Hindutva and sexual minorities. There is a class discrimination within the movement. So how do we address that? I think it's a big question to all of us. I think if you talk about my opinion on this, I think the movement agitation was from the left and center perspective. I think as movement, what have we done? Because now the entire North, I think the North India has been taken over by the right-wing politics. But the South India is very strong here. You got it? I think that is what I wanted to share, and definitely I think what is my contribution towards that and having a political dialogue about sexuality, dharma, gender and dharma. So how do you bring up this interpretation? Because Pope Francis was never against the issues of sexual minorities. He says in 2012, a person who is gained beliefs in God, who am I here to judge? And even the Islam thing, the sacred books are spoken for people. Maybe the interpretation of these issues has totally bifurcated the movement and issues. That's why I always quote, it is not history, History. History is in a man, patriarchy, dominant context. History is into the feminist women's context.
Great, great.
Ruchira, you get the last word.
Get the last word. So I'm so happy because I would just say that it's been a privilege to be on this panel, and I know the lived experiences of all the women on this panel. And, you know, I read about you, I know some of you, so it was just a privilege to be part of this women's circle. And I hope the Gender Park flourishes and grows, because now more than ever is there a need for a gender park. With fascism on a rampage in India, we have, you know, it's going to be the women who will have to challenge it, because fascism rests on misogyny. As I explained, that first of all, it normalizes hierarchy, it eroticizes violence. And the two things begin at home. So we are the people who will have to challenge it. And then to quote Malika, who said that, you know, we have to stop normalizing hierarchy and challenge violence by taking it on in our own lives, because it's at home that we accept.
We just lost you. Your sound got turned off. Ruchira, can you hear me? I think we just lost contact.
Yeah.
There's nothing. She's on mute. She can't hear me either. We are on mute. Why are we on mute?
Few of us who can speak up, and maybe the safety of this gender park will create that space for us to have more and more open debate and discussion. So I really think that this is the time for the women's voice to be organized and challenge this fascism. And the second point that I want to make is that social change can only begin when we take it inside our homes. And somebody asked a question about Biden and Trump and LGBTQI. No generalization is true. So I think to generalize and to wish that the entire LGBTQI community would be left-wing is not going to happen. The entire Dalit community would be left-wing and would challenge fascism is not going to happen. Everyone will take their own decisions based on their context. In the context of Dalits, I traveled through Bihar and UP and 13 different states and Gujarat during the Shaheen Bagh movement in India last year, speaking at multiple rallies at the Shaheen Bagh rallies, Calcutta, Hyderabad, wherever. And you know, one of the things I found was that the Muslim women were telling me that the Dalits have gone over to the BJP for one simple reason. And that reason was, they said that the RSS workers on the ground would go and tell Dalits that if the Muslims are displaced from their land and property, you will get that land and property. So they did it for a simple economic reason that they thought they would get in, not knowing that the entire pie is shrinking. So it's not that the slice that they get will become bigger. They will get smaller and smaller slices, but they will get someone else's slice. So they didn't realize that the entire economic policy itself is shrinking the pie, because the pie is actually being sold to America, where also fascism is rising.
Thank you
So
very much. I wanted to thank the panelists, all four of you, and the audience for such an enthusiastic response periodically. And I have been privileged to be with the Gender Park, the architects who have built this. I was part of the selection process in 2013. It's been 8 years since then. And I think so much exciting stuff can come out of here. And we've just got to start and put all our heads together and go inwards and outwards at the same time. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. The next session will be starting in 5 minutes. Thank you, Malika ma'am, Akai, and the rest of the panelists who are now not on screen.